Hey guys, I have chosen the Chernobyl, Ukraine power plant disaster as the case study that I'm going to critique. Happened in 1986. The reason why I chose this case study is because I was not aware that it was in the textbook in chapter 12. And when we did our last big assignment, the assignment 3, section 2, I actually did it on the Chernobyl case study. And so on top of the fact that I was already interested in the Chernobyl disaster, I wanted to be able to compare my case study to the one that was in the book. Not to mention, instead of just focusing on the case study, I wanted to see what has come of the disaster now 25, 30 years later. First, I'm going to cover the case study in the textbook. Stage 1 says you're a nuclear science administrator in the USSR in charge of oversight of the nuclear power stations. As a backdrop, the personnel on the plant, they weren't well trained. The power plant has a flawed design. You have somewhere in the realm of 135,000 citizens within 30 kilometers radius of the plant. In stage 1, it states April 26, 1986, you get a call that 2 explosions have occurred at the plant. What is your plan of action? The first point in the case study as plan of action is to deploy first responders, engineers, and hazmat capable responders. Be prepared to shut down the plant, have an evacuation plan, and then compile inventory of whatever medical resources and evacuation vehicles you may have. The communication plan at this point is, first off, you got to determine the condition of the plant to be able to relay that information, and you got to notify central and local government agencies what resources are needed. First responders, firefighters, engineers, protective gear, and some vehicles. Stage 2 of the case study, it turns out that reactor 4 has been destroyed by the explosion. 2 workers died in the explosion, and 6 firefighters died of acute radiation poisoning while fighting the blaze. Radioactive material has been released into the atmosphere. Crews used government-sanctioned helicopters to drop material into the core of the power plant and attempt to flood it with water to stop the chemical or the reaction, the chain reaction. What's your plan of action at this point? You want to evacuate residents, initiate medical triage. You want to develop a plan to stop the leak of radioactive material. And as your communication plan, government should notify public and surrounding areas of what happened. And the resources you need at this stage of the case study is obviously medical personnel, equipment and facilities. You need vehicles, you need temporary housing, you need food and water. Stage 3, the residents in and around the area have been evacuated. You have created a temporary containment structure. They refer to it as a large coffer dam. It's temporary, however. What's your plan of action at this point? You need to start to be putting together some sort of plan to handle the population that you've relocated, the population that was within that 30 kilometer area around the plant. You got to figure out a plan of what you're going to do with them. You got to figure out some sort of long-term plan for medical care of these people who have been affected by the radiation. You need to inspect remaining reactors for potential similar incidences. At this stage, what's your communication plan? Government must be made aware of the inherent design flaw of these Soviet Union reactors. What resources do you need? You need nuclear engineers to evaluate those other plants. You need better training for nuclear power plant personnel. Key issues raised by the case study is that back in 1986, obviously the USSR was a Soviet country or a communist country. It was, according to the textbook, it was a closed society that was isolated from the culture of safety for its nuclear reactors. Items of note: it gives the death toll and the injured, those affected. The numbers are pretty staggering. In the Ukraine, which is where Chernobyl is, 8,000 people ultimately died. 125,000 had related health issues. In Belarus, which is a surrounding country, obviously when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of the smaller outlying, what was part of the Soviet Union became its own country. Ukraine, Belarus were 2 examples of that. In Belarus, 2 million people have health issues. In Russia currently, there are 370,000 with health issues as a result of the Chernobyl meltdown. First thing I want to do is I would like to highlight some of the differences I noticed in the case study that I had drawn up to the one from the textbook. In the stage 1 portion of my case study, I gave a little bit more detail about what the inherent flaw was that the textbook doesn't mention. The Chernobyl plant, it's a natural uranium-fueled, water-cooled, graphite-moderated nuclear power producer. It was located about 60 miles north of Kiev in the Ukraine along a fertile grain-producing region within the southwestern edge of the former Soviet Union. Soviet Union at the time was utilizing a model reactor that, according to American physicist and Nobel laureate Hans Bethe, has a quote-unquote fundamentally faulty design having a built-in instability. Also, the Chernobyl reactors, they weren't protected by containment structures like the ones that are required for U.S. reactors. The point that I'm trying to bring up is that in the Soviet Union back in the time, they didn't have the safety, kind of like the case study mentions. There wasn't a culture of safety in and around the closed society that was the Soviet Union at the time. Another point that I wanted to highlight that I went into a little bit more detail about that the textbook didn't, is that the reason why there was a meltdown is because engineers back in the morning hours of April 30th of '86, engineers, they proceeded to conduct a government-sanctioned experiment that required the bypassing of several safety mechanisms in an effort to gain some knowledge about the reactors and what potential uses they had aside from their use as a nuclear power reactor. They were actually trying to see if they could generate power for the local area to be able to pump water in the event that they're not using the power plants just strictly to generate power. That wasn't mentioned in the case study in the textbook. And another final point that I found in the case study, or the one that I wrote up versus the one that was in the textbook, was that the immediate cause of the Chernobyl accident was a mismanaged electrical engineering experiment. The mismanagement was the result of a fatal combination of ignorance and complacency, which is kind of essentially what was being said in the case study about how it was a closed society that didn't really share the same values and the culture of safety, particularly for something like nuclear reactors, that the U.S. and other Western countries had at the time. Because we were doing case studies in that last assignment, we weren't actually finding any kind of relevant or more current information about the Chernobyl plant. I was strictly just trying to draw up a case study when I was getting research for it. So this time around, I wanted to find some information about what we've learned since then, or what Russia, what the USSR has learned since then. And I found an article in the New York Times that was written in 2011 by Andrew Kramer. It talks about the nuclear industry in Russia today, how they sell safety, and they purport it's because of what they learned from the Chernobyl accident. I'm going to highlight a few things that I found in this article that I found interesting, is that now, 25 years later, part of all design features for new power plants, new nuclear reactors, are core catchers. And what core catchers are is in the event of a core meltdown, that the actual material has melted down is so hot that it actually burns through everything down into the ground. And there was a term for it. I think they call it the China effect, which I guess is some sort of play on the idea that it would go straight down through the ground, unabated by the actual ground and all the way down to China. I guess that's an American term because China isn't directly on the opposite side of the earth as from Russia. It's on the opposite side of the earth from the United States. But anyway, the point is that current nuclear reactors now have a core catcher. It's a design feature for the newest of Russia's state-owned nuclear reactors, and obviously that is something that they learned from the meltdown, was that the core gets so hot, can't be controlled, it just sinks and melts down to the ground. Another part of this article I found interesting is that they state that a lot of what Russia is doing with their new power plants is it's a sales pitch. They're stating that due to the lessons they learned from Chernobyl, it was a hard-earned experience that has made Russia the world's most safety-conscious nuclear proponent, which I'll show that isn't quite true throughout this article, which is what the author highlights. In recent years, the Russian nuclear industry has profited handsomely by selling reactors abroad, mostly to developing countries, namely China and India. And the reason for this is also stated in the article, is that, let me find it here, is that Russia is still in control of the majority of the ability, I'll find it right here. Here it is. As a legacy of the Cold War, Russia possesses about 40% of the world's uranium enrichment capacity. So they have this technology and they have this product, and they're currently selling it. They export about $3 billion worth of fuel a year of that uranium. It states here, even as Russia seeks to export reactors backed by the safety assurances that they say they learned from the Chernobyl accident, money is tight in Russia, and it's delayed plans for replacing some of their own aging nuclear reactors that include 11 style reactors similar to or exact to the ones that were in Chernobyl, that don't have a containment vessel or core catchers. Which obviously means that there's the potential for another disaster. And one last thing I wanted to mention here from this article is that there was a Norwegian environmental group. They said that the Russian reactor designs had indeed improved greatly since Chernobyl, which was built without a containment vessel, but the industry lacks independent oversight in Russia's politically centralized system, he said, leaving profit as the motive alone to guide development. And as one of the themes of all of these videos that I've done all semester is that when money is the primary motive, it tends to not take a back seat in any facet of the existence of whatever it is that I've been talking about. So my point is that Russia, they have the material, they have the industry to build these power plants, and money is their primary motivator. So whether or not these things are in fact as safe as they purport that they are, they're out to make money. And they don't have, as most Western countries do, independent oversight, because the government still controls the majority. It's a politically centralized system, so the government runs everything. It hasn't gone too far away from its communist roots. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. I don't think so. That's it, guys. Thank you.